Hi, Mike Steinell here. First of all, thanks for listening to Murder at Birdland. If you've been following the story, you're probably glad to know that in today's episode, Martin Spencer finally makes it to 1949. I am pleased to announce that we have a guest narrator today who will be doing some of the voices for the New York characters. My good friend, former colleague, and native New Yorker, Rich DeRosa. Rich is not only a great composer and drummer, but also, as you will find, a very talented voice actor. So enjoy.
Rosewood Audio presents Murder at Birdland, an audio novel narrated by its author, Mike Steinell. Murder at Birdland is a work of fiction loosely inspired by the lives and experiences of jazz musicians in the late 1940s who performed in and around 52nd Street in New York City. All names, places, and incidents depicted in this novel are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events is purely coincidental. And now, Episode 8 of Murder at Birdland.
Chapter 14, The Three Deuces. The silence arrived, and Martin tried to open his eyes. The buzzing had stopped, and the pain had eased, but the muscles of his neck and shoulders were still in spasm. He moved his limbs, testing them to see if anything was broken. He felt his head for blood. Finding none, he assumed that the car had not hit him. That was good. He was lucky. Bracing himself with both hands, he tried to push upright. Eyes still closed, his face in a grimace, he leaned back against something hard, the fender of a 1947 Cadillac. He realized he wasn't in the street, but on the sidewalk. Evidently 52nd had been widened at some point. Why does this always hurt so much?" he whispered. He steadied himself with his right arm and tried to roll to his knees. Just as he was almost on all fours, something hot brushed against his left side. He jerked away, hitting the fender hard. When he looked up, a man stood over him, camera in hand, offering to help. The man's name was Shooter Cobb.
"Hey, mister, what you doing down there? Did I knock you down? Sorry, didn't see you. Let me help you up, or do you want to sit here a moment and make sure you didn't break nothing?"
Martin tried to speak. Nothing came out. He drew a deep breath and tried again. Give me a moment." He was having trouble regrouping from the loop. The heat from Shooter's camera wasn't helping.
"Sure, buddy. Do what you gotta do."
He turned to the doorman and asked,
"Gil, did you see this guy? It's like he came out of nowhere. I took a shot, heard the thud, and turned around, and he's just down there on a pavement." "Nah, I didn't see nothing, Shooter."
Gilbert J. Pincus had been a doorman on 52nd Street for more than a decade. He liked to call it Swing Street or simply The Street. Gil had worked Dave's Blue Room, the famous store, the yacht club, the Three Deuces, and seen it all. Stocky, cheerful, barely 5 feet tall, he wore a double-breasted coat and a military-style cap. An unlit cigar perpetually occupied the corner of his infectious smile. Night after night he greeted customers like a carnival barker.
"Best music on the street, right here, through this door. Come on in, folks."
Over the years, Gil had earned the nickname, the Mayor of 52nd Street. During his tenure on the street, Gil had seen the 2 blocks of 52nd Street between 5th Avenue and Broadway become the epicenter of the jazz world. The more than a dozen small clubs, some renovated brownstones from the turn of the century, hosted the greatest musicians on the planet. The 21 Club had been there before all the rest. With the repeal of Prohibition in 1933, the clubs sprung up like weeds, most of them featuring the popular music of the decade, swing. The stars of that era were Duke Ellington, Tommy Dorsey, Count Basie, Ben Webster, and Coleman Hawkins. By 1945, a new music called bebop had taken hold, and patrons who were willing to hop from club to club could hear in one night the greatest stars of bop: Bud Powell, Charlie Parker, Art Tatum, and Dizzy Gillespie. Those were the most famous, but the street also featured the near-famous and the soon-to-be-famous, like Sonny Rollins, Miles Davis, and Dexter Gordon. By 1955, most of the clubs were begone or turned into strip joints, but in 1949, the street was still a beehive of activity from early evening till the wee hours of the morning. Tourists, hipsters, servicemen, and musicians crowded the sidewalks 7 nights a week. The drinks were expensive in the music clubs, but in and among them were the small bars and diners where performers would often congregate on off nights or between sets. Gil watched Martin struggle to get upright.
He gonna be okay, Shooter? Don't know, Gil. Didn't you see him in back of me? Nah, like I said, he came out of nowhere. You know, Shooter, always something crazy happening on the street.
Shooter kept his eye on Martin, who was still catching his breath. Shooter was one of the handful of photographers that roamed in and out of the dozen or so jazz clubs, bars, and strip joints on the street. Born Stanislava Kabisius in Lithuania in 1912, he had grown up in Brooklyn and worked the clubs since 1942. Martin was on all fours, but he hadn't gotten up yet. He slipped the photo into the styrofoam sleeve and returned it to his coat pocket. Shooter, with a hand under Martin's armpit, helped him get his feet under his body. When Martin was fully upright, he began brushing the dust from the street off his coat.
There you go, pal. That's better, ain't it?
Shooter, who was quite a bit taller, bent his head down to make eye contact. Martin was busy with the dust. He didn't notice. When he finally looked up, he managed a small smile. I'm fine. I'm okay. Thanks for your help, sir.
Hey, buddy, listen. I feel bad. Didn't mean to knock you down. Let me buy you a drink. You going in here?
Shooter pointed to the front door of the Three Deuces. Next to the door was a sign. The Three Deuces presents the Charlie Parker Quintet. Martin stared at the sign and smiled. He turned to Shooter and nodded his head. Yeah, I'm going in. Wouldn't miss a chance to hear Bird. I came a long way just for this. A long way.
So, you's a fan?
Who isn't? Charlie Parker is the greatest.
Yeah, I guess he's okay. I kind of like the swing stuff, actually. You know, like Count Basie. The Count is great. He's playing right down the street.
He pointed toward the famous door.
This new thing, you know, bop. An acquired taste, I suppose. Anyway, I'm going in here to do some work, and it looks like that's where you was headed. So I'll buy you a drink, okay? I shot 3 groups going in. It looks like they got money to spend. Dressed fancy, you know.
As he said it, he smiled, nodded his head, and raised his eyebrows. Although Stanislava Kabisius was born in Lithuania, his voice held no trace of Eastern Europe. He had grown up on the streets of Brooklyn, where his friends knew him as Stan. He had entertained the idea of changing his name legally to Stanley K., but never got around to it. When he started taking pictures in the clubs, one of the club owners called him Shooter, and in an attempt to pronounce his last name, reduced it to 1 syllable. It stuck, and on the street he was known as Shooter Cobb. Shooter had the gift of gab. He could talk with anyone about anything. More importantly, he could talk just about anybody into having their photo taken and then paying $2 for each copy. If the photo was good and the table had money, he might sell 2 or 3 copies of each shot. The club would get a cut, so he, like the other cameramen on the street, had full access to every joint in the area, with the exception of the 21 Club. The rich and famous clientele at 21 relished their privacy. A photographer might lurk outside and get a shot of a movie star or a politician that he could sell to a gossip magazine, but would only be allowed inside on rare occasions. People called the cameramen different names: shutterbugs, photogs, photomen, or shooters. There were many shooters on 52nd Street, but only one shooter Cobb. He was the best and the most successful. Shooter was successful because he worked quickly, able to enter a club and size up his prey in a matter of seconds. His tools were his camera and the flash bulbs that bulged his coat pockets. Fresh ones on the right, spent bulbs on the left. The left pockets of all his coats were slightly darkened, singed from the inside by the heat of the bulbs. Shooter could change the bulbs with amazing speed. Before his subjects could even adjust their eyes after the bright flash, fingers would be licked, the bulb removed and on its way to his pocket, and another bulb installed. Over the years, the tips of his fingers had lost feeling and were perpetually white with blisters. Martin and Shooter entered the Three Deuces while Gil held the door. Martin kept his distance from Shooter's camera and was shocked by the smoke. He hadn't anticipated it. It irritated his nose and made him cough a bit. Evidently in 1949, when one went to a nightclub, one smoked. He would have to get used to it, he resolved. He checked the watch on his left wrist, 5:38. Need to set the other when I figure out what time it is, here, in this loop. Just inside the entrance was the coat check, a small closet separated from the main room by a Dutch door. The ledge on the bottom part of the door served as a counter of sorts. The opening framed the very pretty face of Sondra Burke, the coat check girl. She was resting her elbows on the counter as they entered. "Hey, Shooter," she said, then turned to Martin with a warm smile. "Welcome to the Three Deuces." She lifted up, reached out a hand, and asked, "May I take your coat, sir?" Martin, still a bit wobbly from the loop, didn't say anything, just stared. She tried again. "Sir, coat? It's complimentary." He glanced down, remembering the styrofoam sleeve. I think I'll keep it with me." She brightened. "That's fine. If you change your mind, I'll be right here." Shooter set his camera on the ledge, smiled at Sondra, and began flirting in a voice that was a cheap imitation of Cary Grant.
Sondra, Sondra, Sondra. My goodness, you look particularly lovely tonight.
The coat check girl tilted her head and rested it on her hands, as if she was posing for a glamour photo. "Ah, Shooter, I bet you say that to all the girls on the street." Martin watched her. There was something about her that seemed familiar, but he couldn't place it. She was lovely. She had that girl next door kind of beauty. Her hair was curly, ash brown, shoulder length, and pulled back at the sides with bobby pins. Martin had seen the style in movies from the 40s. Her features were symmetrical and her face was heart-shaped, broad at the temples to make room for her very large eyes, and tapered at the chin. Her cheekbones were high and soft, almost like a porcelain doll's, until her smile revealed 2 dimples. "A movie star, that's it. She looks like someone I've seen in the movies." He frowned in concentration. He couldn't place the face. A couple entered and Martin backed up against the wall just to the right of the front door. He felt heat and a slight vibration, then realized that he was standing next to a line of photos, jazz greats who had played at the Three Deuces. He edged away from them. Still listening to the banter between Sondra and Shooter, he scanned the club, looking for Tony and his friends. Shooter continued to flirt with Sondra, but his attention was on the crowd. His head panned left and right like a panther taking inventory of his prey. The club was packed. With Bird headlining, it was a rare night when it wasn't. The room was small, but with tabletops the size of saucers and ridiculously narrow chairs tucked tightly underneath them, the Three Deuces could seat around 80. If you counted the 10 seats at the bar and standing room, 100 jazz lovers could be crammed in. The official capacity on the fire marshal's sign was 55, but it would never be enforced if the owner kept the right people paid off. Shooter, having sized up the room, turned once again to the pretty coat-check girl. Still attempting the phony upper-crust accent, he asked,
"What do you think, my dear Sondra? Why don't we exit this tawdry little gin joint and you and I run away? Brazil or Argentina? Paris? Oh, come on, Sondra. Who doesn't love Paris?"
Sondra smiled, tipped her head, and squinted one eye. "Sounds great, Shooter. I assume we're taking your wife along, are we not?"
"Oh, yeah, the missus."
She wrinkled her nose in a face that accentuated her dimples, while at the same time showed her disdain. Martin thought the flirtation inappropriate. Shooter was old enough to be her father. But in fact, Sondra didn't really mind. They were business partners of a sort. She was the one who sold the finished prints. She got 50 cents per copy. Shooter glanced back at Martin.
Oh yeah, that drink. Listen, pal, you tell Joey at the bar what you want, and the first one's on me. I'll be back later to settle."
He put 2 fingers in his mouth and let loose with a quick whistle. Joey looked up, and Shooter pointed toward Martin with his thumb, then tapped his own chest with his index finger. Joey nodded. Shooter leaned in toward Sondra.
"Kid, this is going to be a good night. I got a feeling. We're going to make some dough. Maybe enough for those tickets to Argentina?"
With a wink, he headed toward the best-dressed table in the room. Under his breath, mostly for Sondra's benefit, he said,
"Okay, you tourists, here comes Shooter Cobb. Welcome to New York City."
When he had left, Sondra flashed a warm smile at Martin. "How about that coat?" Martin smiled, shook his head, and headed to the bar. As he passed the coat check, he got a faint trace of Sondra's perfume, barely noticeable, but enough to stir something, a memory, a feeling. "I know that. That scent. Why? How?" It pulled him back to something familiar, but he couldn't place it. Chapter 15. Shooter Cobb. Shooter worked fast. He had to. The owner had made the rules clear. "Look, Shooter, these people come to hear jazz. Do whatever you want during the break, but I can't have you walking around and distracting folks when the band's playing." The owner had his rules, but more importantly, Shooter was under a time constraint of no small severity, as the finished prints needed to be delivered to Sondra before the end of each set. That meant once the music started, Shooter was out the door, jogging to Broadway, then a half a block north to Sammy's Photos. Sammy's was open 24/7. During the day, the shop catered to the tourists that frequented the area, but at night the priorities lay with the cameramen like Shooter. Once the film was delivered, Shooter might wait on Broadway and smoke a cigarette or jump in one of the diners for coffee. Later in the evening, during the last set, he might grab a drink at the corner bar. He would watch the time carefully and be waiting at Sammy's counter just as the band was beginning its last tune. The prints were rarely late. Most nights, even before the music stopped, Sondra had each photo tucked neatly into a cardboard folio, both protection and makeshift frame. She was a skilled salesperson, always complimenting the patrons on how wonderful they looked. She mentioned the price only when asked. "Why, they're just $2 a copy," she would assure them. "Very reasonable for professional work of this quality." Then she would lean in and admire the print one more time. "That's a great shot. Look at that beautiful smile." $2 in 1949 would be roughly $20 today. In an era when most folks owned nothing better than a cheap Kodak Brownie, photos were a luxury. Only professionals or devoted amateurs with means could afford something like Shooter's 4x5 speed graphic. Photos were a luxury to be sure, but if the evening was memorable, $2 a print was a fair price. Martin sipped his drink slowly. It burned the back of his throat. Cheap scotch, he thought. Definitely not Dewar's. He glanced at his 2 watches and realized that he hadn't set the one on his right arm to loop time. He asked the man beside him for the time and set it. 9:45. Martin scanned the room, searching for Tony Martin and his friends, a party of 4, 3 men and a woman. The club was packed, and with people milling about and smoke hanging in the air, he couldn't see much of the room. One overwhelmed waitress worked the floor. Impatient patrons drifted to the bar, crowding the space where Martin sat, making it even harder for him to see. He turned back to the bar and discreetly pulled the print from its sleeve, then swiveled again, looking into the haze. Tony and his friends had to be there. Shooter had photographed them outside minutes earlier. Martin studied the photo of his father. Tony was sharply dressed. His thick, dark hair, groomed with pomade, glistened in the light from the flash. His tie was distinctive, very wide, containing bold geometric patterns in a style known to designers as streamline moderne. Martin didn't know the style had a name. He just knew he would recognize it. He scanned the room, looking for the tie. Shooter worked the table, smiling and interacting playfully with the patrons. With every flash, Martin flinched. The music was about to start, and drinkers, ever more impatient, crowded the bar. Joey, the bartender, worked with the quick efficiency of a trained athlete, mixing drinks 4 at a time. Periodically, he would look up from his work and with a quick glance decide who would be next. The drinkers were loud. Some knew his name and shouted it. "Hey, Joey, 2 bourbons." Others addressed him generically. "Bartender, bartender. Need a beer here." Joey ignored the shouting, focusing on the order in front of him. When he finished, he simply locked eyes with the next customer and gave a tiny nod. "Okay, pal, you're next." Someone pushed into Martin's side, trying to get Joey's attention. Martin shifted to give the man space. Then he saw it, the tie. Circles and triangles in red and brown on silver. Flamboyant but tasteful. The man's face was turned toward the bar, but Martin recognized the thick, jet-black hair. The man called out, "Joey! Hey, Joey!" Joey nodded, and the order was placed. 2 whiskeys, a Schlitz, and a Coke. The man sighed and stepped back a bit, glancing apologetically at Martin. "Geez, the service is terrible here. It's every man for himself some nights." He craned his neck to check Joey's progress, then decided to make small talk. "You here to check out Bird?" Martin froze for a second. He hadn't anticipated another conversation with his father so soon. Yes, I am. They were packed in so tightly that Tony hadn't really seen Martin's face. He made a quick glance, then leaned back to get a better look. Hey, I know you. You're the guy from Kansas City. Tooties, right? The guy that looks like my Uncle Eddie. Your name's Martin. Yeah, that was me, Martin Spencer. I'm from Topeka. Yeah, man, you're the cat that almost played with Bird. I remember how good you sounded. Hey, it's good to see you again. Why are you in New York? Well, Martin started to speak before he had sorted out his thoughts. He couldn't say that he had come to find and possibly save his father, the man standing right next to him. He patched together a fumbling response. I'm, kinda on a vacation, sorta. Oh, Tony said, cool. I'm kinda on vacation, too. Just got off the road, looking for work. You know anybody looking for a trumpet man? Before Martin could finish, the drinks arrived. Tony paid the bartender, then began wrestling with the glasses, trying to determine the best way to carry 4 drinks back to his table without a spill. As he did, he continued to speak. Man, I wish I had a photo of my uncle. You wouldn't believe the resemblance. It's uncanny. Having secured the drinks in a manageable cluster, he began to work his way through the crowd. Over his shoulder, he said, Nice to see you again. Enjoy the music. Martin watched his father weave through the room, deliver the drinks, and join in conversation with his friends. He studied his face. It was a good face, kind, open. He felt warmed by their interaction, until he remembered what would happen in just a few hours, a few blocks away. The trip to this time and place had been on Martin's mind since the experiment on Elm Street. It had kept him awake at night, distracted him during sessions with patients and in meetings with colleagues. The questions had piled up, one on top of the other, but they were mainly about the nuts and bolts of the travel, the looping. How does this work? Am I getting younger? What can I take with me? What if I'm in the photo? How do I carry prints? Can I get film? How far back can I go? How do I get home, if I can? He had focused so deeply on the mechanics that he'd barely thought about what he would do once he arrived. Now he was here, the Three Deuces, November 8th, 1949. He had found his father, but he realized he had no plan. He knew it happened on November 8, 1949. For weeks he had used the pronoun it instead of more gruesome terms like murder, killing, or death. It would happen. There would be a firearm. A man would be shot. A man named Tony Martin. Shot twice. Shot right beneath the Birdland awning. He would die at the scene. What would Martin do? That was the last question. All the rest had been answered. Would he watch? Would he intervene? Both options gave him a chill. The crowd settled into their seats as Martin watched Tony and his friends. They were excited, and why not? They were dressed up, out on the town, and about to hear the undisputed king of bebop, Charlie Parker. Martin was excited as well. Sure, he had just heard Bird live at Tooties, but that was with Kansas City locals. Tonight, Bird would be performing with true New York star power. Red Rodney on trumpet, Al Haig on piano, Tony Potter on bass, and Max Roach on drums. Martin held an advantage over most everyone in the room because he had listened to thousands of hours of Charlie Parker recordings, including Charlie Parker live at the Three Deuces, recorded a year earlier in 1948. He knew what tunes they would most likely play and probably the order as well. His emotions were a jumble, warmed by the conversation with his father at the bar, chilled by the thought of what would happen at 11:50, thrilled to hear Bird in New York. Charlie Parker's career had been on a meteoric arc since 1944. Even though 6 months in a mental hospital in California had kept him out of the scene for the better part of 1947, he had worked regularly on the street since his return to New York. In 1948, he was voted the number 2 altoist in the downbeat poll, just a few votes behind Johnny Hodges, Ellington's lead saxophonist. The fall of 1949 was a big year for him. In November, he would record Bird with Strings, one of his top-selling LPs, and in December he would open at a new club, Birdland, named in his honor. The club was owned by Morris Levy and Oscar Goodstein. Although it was a tribute to the great saxophonist, due to disagreements with the owner about pay, Bird would play there infrequently. Legend has it that Bird was once thrown out of the club because he had arrived in a state of extreme inebriation and had engaged in a shouting session with Goodstein. Martin had seen pictures of the iconic Birdland awning. Tonight he would see it for real. Birdland's October opening had been delayed, so Parker spent most of October and November at the Deuces. The club had done well since opening night, October 6th, but there had been some bumps along the way. Most notable was Parker's tendency to be absent or tardy on a regular basis. It became such a problem that the owner began paying the saxophonist only for the nights when he showed. Absenteeism wasn't the only issue. The management also hired a handler to make sure Bird hadn't pawned his saxophone, and if he had, retrieve it and get it to the club by showtime. The same handler was assigned to retrieve Bird should he get delayed on his breaks, which he spent at the club Carousel, just next door. The whiskey there was cheaper, and Joey and the other bartenders at the Deuces had been instructed not to serve Bird complimentary drinks. "He's going to drink us broke," the owner had declared. Still, when Bird was on stage, the music was magnificent, and the place was packed. Shooter was still taking pictures as the band began to assemble. Al Haig, the pianist, began noodling, warming up. The crowd noise changed from a roar of conversation to a murmur of anticipation when Charlie Parker entered through the front door. He nodded to Sondra and walked leisurely toward the back of the club, headed to the dressing room. Tony stood and intercepted him. They spoke briefly. Then Tony whistled a short but loud blast to get Shooter's attention and summoned him to their table. The cameraman posed the group and took the shot. Martin winced from the flash, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the white styrofoam sleeve. "This is the one," he thought. The photo dated 11/8/49. He checked his watch. Almost 10. It happens at 11:50. Shooter slipped out as the owner stepped up to introduce the band. "Ladies and gentlemen, the Three Deuces is proud to present, for your listening pleasure, the Charlie Parker Quintet. Please give a warm welcome to Charlie Yardbird Parker." The crowd roared. Max Roach launched into a crisp intro, and when the horns entered, Martin recognized the tune instantly. Anthropology. He had played it at Tootie's as his impromptu audition. If the birthday cake hadn't arrived when it did, he might have actually played with Bird. Martin listened to the music in rapt attention, and only when the last song was completed and Bird was thanking the crowd did he remember why he was there. He watched as Tony, in his sharp pinstripe suit and silk tie, make the universal "I need the check" signal. The others at the table began to stir. It appeared they were leaving. Martin looked at his watch. It was only 11:05. He was confused as to what to do next. He's leaving. Do I follow? Should I follow him? Bird emerged from the dressing room with a lit cigarette and drifted toward the door. Tony and the others crowded around the coat check. Bird paused to speak with them. Martin assumed Tony was asking about sitting in. He's planning on sitting in tomorrow. But tomorrow's too late, unless what? He didn't know what. Bird nodded and headed toward the door, no doubt on his way to the club carousel, where the whiskey was cheaper. At the doorway, he and Gil Pincus exchanged a few words, while Tony and his friends were admiring the photographs that Sondra was holding. Somehow Shooter had been able to develop the film and make prints in less than an hour. Tony paid Sondra for the souvenir as Martin touched the pocket of his overcoat where he carried the identical photo. So strange, he said to himself. What now? What do I do now?
You've been listening to Murder at Birdland, an audio novel. To learn more about the author and the story behind the music, visit murderatbirdland.com or mikesteinell.com.